Hello and welcome to NewsClick and Indian Cultural Forum. Today we have with us Mr. Mander, who's a writer, social activist and a former IS officer who's worked extensively with survivors of mass violence. I want to thank Mr. Mander for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Mander. I want to start by asking you, as the title read, Partitions of the Heart, Unmaking the Idea of India. What is this idea of India, or rather the ideas of India that we're talking about today, and what is contributing to its unmaking?
What is contributing to the unmaking is the partitions of the heart. And Gopal Krishna Gandhi had written an article some time back where he said that there was one partition on the land of India. And now we're building a new partition, actually tens of thousands and thousands of lakhs of partitions in the hearts and minds. But the idea of India that I'm speaking about is an idea of a country where which belongs equally to people it does not matter which God you worship or if you worship no God. It does not matter what caste, what language, what sexuality, what the color of your skin is, who you love, how you love, and many other things. So the idea that this is going to be a country where you do not have to conform to a particular majoritarian idea in order to belong. It's a country which belongs equally to people in all their diversities. It is that idea, and it's an idea which is embedded in the Constitution. It was an idea which was central to the freedom struggle. But I think it's a much older idea which dates back to Ashok's time and to Akbar and to the Bhakti movement and the Sufi movement and Nanak and Kabir. So it's an idea that has been around, has been intrinsic to our civilization. We've had inequality and legitimized inequality as one part of the idea of India, and one must admit to caste and gender inequality as being also part of the lived experience of India's civilization. But there has been this other side, which is a whole dissenting tradition of the acceptance of respectful acceptance of diversity, which Amartya Sen talks about very beautifully in his book, The Argumentative Indian. So it is that diversity, a certain skepticism of all, the presence of doubt, the absence of certainty of a particular viewpoint being the correct viewpoint. Right. So I think there are many of these, and underlying it, most of all, I guess, is a kind of compassion and respect.
What's most interesting in your book is the fact that you have sort of outlined the kind of violence and crimes and hate crimes especially that goes unquestioned. So why is it relevant to talk about these kinds of hate crimes and violence, and especially the kinds of lynching, if I would just jump the gun and talk about these kinds of crimes and the nature of these crimes?
See, if you look around the world, there's something that is happening globally in country after country. More and more populations in different countries are being attracted to a certain kind of leadership who in some countries like India and the US, we are electing these leaders. In others, in many European countries, they're leading formidable oppositions. But these are leaders who ultimately thrive on deeply divided societies, and these are leaders who legitimize, who actually I would say reflect bigotry and hatred and prejudice, and they amplify it, they legitimize it, and they valorize it. So this is a hard time to be a person from a minority in almost every country in the world. But when I see an increasingly hostile environment everywhere in the world, lynching, mob attacks, hate lynching of the kind that we see is today, I have not found it in any other country in the world. And I think that we need to recognize, in in many ways, I feel that we invent our own particular cruelties.
Right.
So violence against women is common around the world, but burning brides for dowry is our unique contribution. So this this videotaped performative lynching of people of Muslim or Dalit identities is something that we have seen a huge upsurge of in the last 5 years.
Right.
And we need to understand what is happening and what is particular about this. Now, there are, having said this, there are many caveats.
Right.
One of them is that we have seen lynching in India of three kinds earlier. There were lynching of single women as witches in terms of witch hunting. There's been continuous lynching, in fact, over centuries of Dalits. And in places like Calcutta, you've also had lynching of pickpockets as something that you see from time to time. So I think that the second is that we've had communal violence, and that is targeted violence, targeting minorities, and caste violence against Dalits. Again, continuously, and the numbers of people who've been killed in even a single episode, like the 1984 violence in Delhi, or the 2002 Gujarat violence, is probably larger than all the numbers of people who've been killed in lynching, although we don't have strong official data around this. Now, the third caveat, and there are many caveats here, the third caveat is that lynching has occurred in many parts of the world at different points of time.
Right.
And I've seen broadly three kinds of lynching. One of them is what I would call, which is just spontaneous, a genuinely spontaneous group crime that can happen anywhere while we're driving down the road. There can be a road rage or something else. The second is lynching as what I would call rough justice. So the idea that the lynching of pickpockets, for instance, which is happening, for instance, in a big way in Indonesia, or the lynching of alleged rapists in Latin America, even within jails, has been seen. So this is basically on the idea that normal justice is not going to yield, the criminal justice system is not going to punish people who need to be punished, and so we'll take justice into our own hands.
Right.
The third kind of lynching is lynching which is attacking you primarily for who you are rather than what you have done.
Right.
And that is what I would call hate lynching.
Yeah.
And but a lot of hate lynching is also dressed up in my mind as rough justice. So you're saying you're killing Muslims because they have slaughtered a cow, even when there is no evidence to that effect. Or and the strongest parallel, and so the lynching that we're seeing in India today is clearly hate lynching, and its closest parallel is, which I've seen historically, is the lynching of African American in the U.S. in the U.S. South. In fact, for almost 60 years, from the last decade of the 19th century till the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
Now, what is interesting is, the question of numbers and the contrast with communal violence here. So the historians have now, there's been a lot of work more recently on trying to reconstruct what happened in the lynching in the American South. And we find that the numbers, historians say, I've seen one account which says that they have not been able to find a record of more than, say, 3,200 lynchings over 60 years, which means an average of about 50 per year.
Yeah.
So one might say that, and likewise the numbers of lynching, it might be argued today in India, is is, as I said, much smaller than in a single episode of communal violence. What is important is the symbolic, message that is communicated. And I was reading somewhere where somebody said that every lynching of an African American was 1,000 lynchings, which reverberated across the land, and settled in the hearts of every African American person with fear and it is similarly. I mean, I would say every lynching in India today is 10,000 lynchings. So one boy, Muslim boy called Junaid is lynched on a train, and it creates a fear for every Muslim who is now traveling on a train. And his mother says, many colleagues say their mother tells them that if the phone rings, don't say Salam Alaikum, let no one recognize that you are Muslim, don't get into disputes, etc. So it is this symbolic impact. And there's also communal violence, however large it was limited by space and time. It happened in a particular geographical area. It had a beginning and end, and it settled down. Lynching has broken both those boundaries. So it can happen at any place, at any time, to any person who belongs to that identity. And so you're not safe in your own home, you're not safe at work, you're not safe walking down the road, you're not safe on a train. So it is that sense. And the last thing is the performative nature. So the use of the video camera to record, again, is very similar to the public lynchings that happened of African Americans when people would gather. Children, it was like a picnic and you'd watch it. And here you're using the video camera to create it's almost like a reality show or a video game which you are enjoying and participating in through the consumption of those videos. So I think all of this is why it is important for us to recognize that lynching represents a new phase in the way that we, as a society, we are dealing with the relationship of the religious minority with the majority community.
And so this brings me to hate crimes, since we're discussing lynching. Now, what is specific about hate crimes is the fact that how is it different from other kinds on accounts of the identity of the victims who are being attacked, and that's why they're being attacked. So my question to you is, so the systemic killings of mobs are persecuted under milder sections of the IPC. These are section 34, which is common intention, 141, 149, unlawful assembly, 147, 148, rioting, criminal conspiracy, etc. These sections of the IPC do not justify these kind of violences that take place, which are very systemic and very planned. So do you think we need a law that sort of justifies, or do we need, so would a law solve the issue because it will bring out the fact that it needs to be dealt with utmost seriousness, or would you think this is a rather quick fix solution and it'll I will just draw our attention away from the real issue, which is the communal violence and the impunity?
I think it's a very, very good and thoughtful question, because in India we've tended to look at you have a problem and let's solve it by creating another law, and you have another problem and you create another law, and it's a simplistic way of trying to understand how this can be solved. Right. So when initially we spoke about the need for a new law, and a lot of colleagues and activists and the Supreme Court had also endorsed it, I believe that we have to be very clear that we're not needing a law which adds to the powers of the state. Right. And there's a danger. It's not as if the state is not acting in incidents of lynching in ways that it should for justice, because it lacks the powers. Right. I've now made, we have what we call the Karwane Mohabbat. We've been traveling to families who have been affected by lynching. I've done about 26 journeys now to 14 states. I've seen a lot of families. And almost universally, with very few exceptions, what happens is that the police responds. The police is often even standing by, and the entire effort of the police is to criminalize the victim, and to protect the attackers, and it is in that environment that what you need in a new law. So clearly, we don't need to add to the powers of the state. I also worry very much because a lot of talk has been, and I've, even after the Supreme Court's directions, the government has basically said the one thing that is causing lynching is social media, and therefore we need more control over social media, which is again, to my mind, not only going up the wrong path, but also dangerous, because we don't need more surveillance by the state of the social media. And the social media is, we often look at it as the cause of hate violence. No, it is a vehicle in which hate messages are transmitted and so on. And but hate was perpetrated very effectively before social media was there. And social media can be used in multiple ways. So we do need a new law only in one respect, and that is actually in two respects, and I'll explain them. The first of them is that we need a law which makes government officials accountable for failing to do their duty or acting in a malified way when there's hate violence. And so it is creating a new crime of both culpable inaction or malified action when people are being hit by hate violence. And I've been a civil servant, and I know that a civil servant, police officer, or a local magistrate knows what he or she needs to do. But the fact that they don't do it or they act in contrary ways is something that should be recognized to be a crime. So to take a very simple and well-known example, when Pehlu Khan was a dairy farmer who was driving with a truckload of milk dairy cattle. Now, the charge that he was taking those animals for slaughter was transparently false, because the maximum that you can get for a cow, if you're selling a cow for slaughter, is about 5,000 to 7,000 rupees. You buy a milk cow for something like 70,000 rupees. So the fact that he was transporting milk cattle was itself evidence that he was not taking any animal for slaughter. Now, the mob lynched him on that ground. But what was terrible was that the Home Minister declared that he was a cow smuggler and therefore was guilty. But the police registered cases against his son and his nephew and so on for this. And a year later, now 2 years later, it is the family which is running around trying to protect itself rather than the killers. So that kind of action, and that's not untypical, that is in fact routinely how the police is acting. So I believe that we need a law in the context of hate crime which makes public officials, creates new crime for this kind of action or inaction by the police. And the second thing that we need is mandatory provisions for reparation and for support to the families, and the duties of the state with regard to that. So it is to make the state accountable, not to make the state more powerful, and that we need the law. And very interestingly, and this sort of escaped attention of most people, a small state of Manipur actually decided to, it's the first state which has passed a law on lynching after there was one major episode there. And very interestingly, the law that they have created actually has both these provisions. It's the first law that has it, and it creates a kind of a model for the rest of the country.
We hope our viewers found this discussion very useful. Thank you for watching NewsClick and Indian Cultural Forum.